sitting down for time. 2 Corinthians 5, severely understated chapter and much argued over chapter. So, we now get on to encouraging our theme in reconciliation. Reconciliation. Well, we heard that in the service this morning. We now continue with the previous topic for another 10 verses, as mentioned earlier. And we persevere with Paul's insistence that our body is a reflection of Christ, using the letters metaphor, as you remember, of chapter 3, then the jars metaphor of chapter 4, and now the more familiar tent metaphor of chapter 5. The more familiar tent metaphor because Paul had an obsession with tents, because he was a tent maker. And Paul may actually be referring here to our body being dismantled rather than destroyed. That's a different way of thinking. Dismantled instead of destroyed, according to the Net Bible that I tend to use quite often. It's one of my favorites that I use, mostly because it has the Greek in there as well, the Net Bible. So I refer to it quite a bit. So dismantled before that tent is pitched in another location. Before her tent is pitched in another location, much like that tent of meeting. The tent of meeting, remember us describing the tent of meeting? Which was frequently dismantled prior to finally having a permanent location in Jerusalem. However, this is a metaphor in which it is abundantly clear that Paul is referring to the temporal, earthly body which is covering our spirit. We can read that in verses 5, 6, 8, 9, and 10. And he is referring to the flesh on our bones, so to speak, here. He is using this metaphor instead of that hard jars of clay metaphor to refer more specifically to our squishy flesh. Yes. To the clothing covering our spirit. And to further dispose of his critics who think that our flesh will not be resurrected. Those that deny that our bodies will also glorify God in heaven. Which was a concept that Paul strongly defended in chapter 15, as you recall, in that letter to Corinth. First, that other letter, which was a very natural and a very scientific concept, for which Paul was often told that he was out of his mind for believing. Regardless, Paul insists that once we are clothed with the Holy Spirit, our heavenly future is guaranteed. Yep, guaranteed. Verse 5. Absolutely guaranteed. It is guaranteed that we will be at home with the Lord. We will be at home with him immediately following death. Immediately, yeah. And immediately that has no other option. There is no transition period involved. No period of soul sleep, as Jehovah's Witnesses and Seventh-day Adventists wrongly believe. Christians either at home in the body or else they are at home with the Lord. Verses 6 and 8, which you've already heard. A point strongly affirmed by Paul in his letter to those Philippians in 1:23, and strongly affirmed by John in Revelation 6, and strongly affirmed by God in the Old Testament, Exodus 3:6, and very, very strongly affirmed by Jesus in the New Testament, Matthew 22:32. So these verses make for pretty good funeral material. Yep, pretty good, since they are pretty encouraging. And since they eliminate considerable angst and anxiety. Unlike that wistful and wishful RIP slogan. However, we will not be at home with the Lord with a glorified body yet. No, that's an entirely different event. An event in which God will then raise us up with Jesus, as mentioned in verse 14 of the previous chapter, which we didn't cover. An event in which we will be clothed with a glorified